Nexus. I've got Tom from Diamond, Steve from Go North West, Gary from One Bus, and then I have Chris from Northern, Chris again from Transpennine. Now, unfortunately, they've not sent Chris from Network Rail, they've sent Dan, so welcome, Dan. All right. Okay, if I've missed anybody out, my apologies, but thanks for attending. I have one announcement. I want to call or move an extraordinary meeting of the Greater Manchester Transport Committee to consider the subsidised services. Members should have received a report today. Okay. I'm planning to have that meeting on the 31st of March. The date should already be in your diary because of the invite that I've already sent out to everybody over the tram. Okay? So please try your best to attend that meeting. Thank you.
Question.
Sorry? Yes?
Is that going to be before the 10 o'clock start, or will it be at 10 o'clock?
We'll do it as the 10 o'clock start. Okay, you'll be sent out details anyway in due course. Okay. Okay, item 3, declarations of interest. If you've got any declarations, please fill in the form and hand them over to Gwen afterwards, please. Thank you. Item 4, minutes of the GM Transport Committee. Okay, can we move those as a correct record, please? Thank you very much. Have we got any matters arising from those minutes? Yes, Angie?
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the 375 bus, we are pleased that options are being reviewed, and in the meantime, the petition has risen to 3,000 signatures.
Thank you. Anybody else? Phil?
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to a better bus service, a better deal for bus users, it's great that we're having consideration putting a late service on for the 17 bus. Can we also consider putting a late service on for the 163 bus and the number 18 bus?
Can you please see Nick afterwards and Alison over that, please? Okay. Thank you. Has anybody else got any more questions on those? No? Thank you very much. Item 5, the GM Transport Committee Work Programme. Gwen?
Thanks, Chair. The committee's work programme for your last meeting of the committee's municipal year is attached for your consideration, and if members could start thinking about new items for next year, that would be appreciated.
Has anybody got any questions on those? Yes, John?
Chair, I just wondered whether it would be appropriate in the current climate whether we ought to have a standing item on any update in relation to the transport implications of the coronavirus?
Will be mentioned shortly under one of the reports. Okay, thank you. Phil?
Thanks, Chair. Just a proposal for the next year's agenda. Can we put zebra crossings on main routes on the work plan, please, near schools?
Okay. Anybody got anything else to raise on there? No? Okay. Moving on. Now, as you can see, the Mayor's not attended yet. Hopefully he's okay, and he'll attend shortly. So I'll move on to item 7, Transport Network Performance. Bob?
Thanks, Chair, and good morning. Usual report. Following the Christmas period, we experienced the usual ramp-up in demand on the network, particularly through the second half of January into February. This was compounded by various highway enhancement and maintenance schemes and the subsequent effect that had on the bus network. Performance was also impacted by the poor weather and subsequent flooding at parts of the period. Metrolink performance remains similar to the previous months, just behind target at the end of the period, and rail suffered another poor period, but I'm going to leave that to the agenda item before we discuss rail. I'd like to reassure members that we've enacted our contingency plans in conjunction with the COVID-19 virus. We are working with partners, operators, supply chain, both on active measures now and future measures should it escalate. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any members got any questions? Phil?
Bob, in relation to the Ring and Ride service, we've got a really good, well-organised, well-run service. What procedures have you put in place to deal with the outbreak in relation to Ring and Ride?
I think there's various contingency plans. What I won't do is go through them all here now, but Ring and Ride is a particular one. It has a certain demographic, so that may be one of those that we do something slightly different with, and the officers have considered that.
We can make sure that those are sent out to all members, can't you? So once any decisions are made. Okay.
If we make changes to the services, then that will be broadcast. But there's so many different scenarios we're working through at the moment. Whether it be Metrolink, whether it be the bus operators, do we revert to an off-peak service during the peak because of lack of drivers? It'll be those sort of issues, and we'll react at the time.
Okay, John?
Thank you, Chair. It was just in relation to performance by operators that may be impacted by the coronavirus, and how we can ensure that we're not how we can ensure that we're not holding operators responsible for things that are completely out of their control. On the flip side of that, we don't want potentially it used as an excuse for poor performance as well. I just wondered whether there was any way of measuring performance when it could be potentially directly affected outside of operators' control.
I think it's fair to say that all the operators without fail have been really professional in this, actually looking to exchange staff as we need to. We will do a suitable performance regime, but we've got to bear in mind the main thing is to maintain the service. Times like this, we'll have to be mindful of that.
Okay, I've got Nathan.
I was just thinking back to the problems that Northern and potentially TP had when everybody was ill, either over Christmas or just after Christmas. The performance went right down, which is understandable. Do we have a skeleton sort of bare minimum that we would need to run if things go as they've gone in Italy, and potentially they might? Do we have that in mind? Do we know what that looks like? Where if all the drive, somebody within the depot needs to self-isolate or actually comes down, we could end up with the whole depots going down. Do we know what the bare minimum looks like, and at what point, is there a committee that would say, you know what, we're going to go to bare minimum and run with this for 2 weeks? Does that exist?
So we have various working groups for both bus, rail and Metrolink. We asked for scenarios around if you've got 10% less drivers, 20% less drivers, 30%, what would that mean? What services do you thin out? What do you take off? What do you completely suspend? So there are so many permutations this, depending on which depots get impacted. It's probably worth, as we go around some of the operators, that if they want to add to that, feel free.
If it's okay, Chair, Chris Nutton from Transplant and my colleagues from elsewhere in their own stream will probably be able to comment. It's quite a complex matter. It affects a number of different grades of staff who carry out important safety critical duties. So if we just go through them in order, I think each organisation in the rail industry has got its own internal sort of gold command daily review processes. I'm sure my colleagues will nod to that. And equally, the industry as a whole is having some coordinating mind through the rail delivery group. Network Rail at the moment is looking at its ability to staff signalling and control centres, and we'll be putting out, I believe, by the end of the week, a prioritised list of routes that it proposes to keep open. Operators are also looking at a prioritised list of services, effectively, where, for example, operating staff, drivers and conductors, but also on maintenance depots where engineers, if we had an outbreak of a reduction in staff at engineering depots, how many trains that we can put into service. Once all those parties bring their separate plans together, I think the industry in Greater Manchester will be looking to have some extensive dialogue, both with officers and ultimately based on how this committee feels, this group, about how we prioritise service. But clearly the scale of the outbreak is a key input to that, and where it happens. So Bob's point of we can't totally predict because it may affect one area or depot more specifically than others needs to be borne in mind. But we are looking at scenarios around reduced service levels if there was a 25% or 50% reduction in staffing available, and we'll need to get an understanding of what the officers feel is the priorities in Greater Manchester.
Chris?
Yeah, if it's acceptable, Chair and Nathan, I've got a bit of an update when I give the Northern report covering specifically COVID-19 and our preparations, if that works.
Any bus operators who like to make any comments first? No? No? Okay, Roy?
Could I pick up on page 26, 3.17? It refers to the Diamond bus services in Bolton still having problems. I'm speaking on behalf of Bury, and I suppose my colleague over there could speak on behalf of people of Haywood and Rochdale, because this is a very long route and has persistent problems. I would like to acknowledge the managing director of Diamond and other companies did invite us to the new Western Street bus facilities, and we saw the new repairs that are going on, the new buses, green buses, everything. We saw the system, they have electronic system for tracing exactly where there's a bus delayed and sending an extra bus out to deal with it, whatever. It was very, very impressive. The staff gave us time, and I did appreciate it. But the problems continue. He promised us they were going to be solved, and I tended to trust him. If I'm a judge of character, that he's going to try. And they've certainly put a lot of money into the facilities in Bolton. But for the public of Bury, we still have long delays in the bus services on the 471 route. So it was only that it said problems still in Bolton. There are still problems in Bury and Rochdale. And I think finally, and I've said this about the 98, which is even worse, but that's a different company, that the length of the routes, starting sometimes at Shude Hill, going across motorways, I think makes it very hard for the drivers to keep to time, going through several traffic jams. And I've argued for about 20 years for these bus routes to go back to how they were, and Bury to Bolton, Bury to Rochdale, and so on, rather than trying to keep to time on these very long routes. There are other long routes, but I'm not going to go into those today. Anyway, I just wanted to make the point, in the minutes, matters arising, it affects Bury and Rochdale. Thank you.
So just to check, one's Diamond. What's the other service that you mentioned?
Well, I mentioned Go Northwest, the 98. You could write a book on that one. One Polish lady, when I said, this must be the worst bus service in Britain, she said, no, I think it's the worst in Europe. One Polish lady said at the queue. But I could go on about the 98. I won't raise that today. One's in correspondence a lot on that one. But it's the Diamond bus. I wanted to put in the minutes as well that they did, Councillor Haslam, who's not here today, and others were there, invite us to look round everything and the new arrangements making, training new staff, create a lot of new jobs in Bolton. I wish we had the sheds still in Bury and they could recruit staff there. But that's closed at the moment. Okay, thanks.
Okay, right. Can you just switch your mic off? So then the operators, I've got Diamond and Go Northwest, like make a comment on that, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we recognise our performance on the 471 isn't good enough. It is improving. It's just not improving quickly enough. Part of that is about availability of drivers. We've recruited over 100 new drivers. It's about reliability of buses. We've ordered buses, but they take time to come. One of the short-term measures we've taken as well is to take on a customer improvement manager, and his responsibility will be to ensure that services are running correctly, and when they're not, explaining what's happening to customers. That's a dedicated role that's just come on in the last few weeks, so hopefully I'm very confident in the next couple of months or weeks significant improvements will be made. I can only thank people for their patience in the meantime.
Okay, thanks for that. Atiq?
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points. Obviously, because of this virus, we're in unprecedented territory here, and something like that has not been experienced before. In terms of reassuring our passengers, I'd be interested to find out what comms have taken place to make sure that we're reassuring our passengers that we're taking all the necessary steps and we're prepared to deal with it as best as we can. And the second question is, I know it's going to be a very fluid situation and things might change, services might have to be cancelled at the last minute, but do we have a central information point where we can direct passengers, so if there's any last minute cancellations or if they want to check whether the journey they're planning to travel on is still going ahead, rather than going on to different sort of providers, is there going to be a central information system where they can actually go on and see whether they can go ahead with their planned journey or not?
With regards to reassuring passengers, I think the various operators are taking their steps on that, as well as following Public Health England advice. With regards to consolidation of information, if everybody goes to tfgm.com or rings the TFGM contact centre, then we're able to provide that.
Phil?
Chair, it's just in relation to what Roy was saying regarding the Diamond bus service. It's appalling. The 163 is appalling, and at every meeting we're coming here and listening to you saying it's going to get better. We're employing more drivers. We're buying more buses. You need to go back to basics and get the routes sorted out. It's okay employing a manager to deal with customer service. That should have been done right at the start, to listen to all the complaints you're receiving from constituents in Haywood and Middleton and also Bury.
Okay, I've got Peter, no. Anybody else would like to ask a question? No? Okay, thank you very much. So moving back to item 6, we've got the Mayor Andy Burnham here for his mayoral update.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for being slightly late with you this morning. Obviously, lots of other things happening and just having a discussion with businesses about coronavirus planning. So apologies for being late to this meeting. Just to get straight to, I think, where kind of we need to get to a discussion, both myself through Mark with you, it's about how do we kind of get the right arrangements in place to take us through what I think is going to be a decade of major change in transport in Greater Manchester. I think this period, 2020 to 2030, will bring change of a kind that we've not seen for many years. The R network vision that we put out last year, I think, stands. It is a vision for a London-style public transport system, covering all modes on the zonal basis that we've introduced. And of course, now we have a situation where the government is aligning with that vision. And we received some funding in the budget this week, not yet clear exactly how much, but it would appear to be a significant amount of capital funding beginning in 2022-23. Roughly, I think around £800 million could be more, but we will see. So there is a sort of growing financial commitment to the vision that we're putting forward. But the reason why I say it's just going to happen, whatever the politics at the national level, there's of course the clean air imperative, which is now kind of coming together with the transport improvement imperative, and these things are now almost like running completely in parallel at the same pace. You'll know that we're under an instruction, or the districts are under an instruction to introduce a clean air zone by the middle of next year. We were disappointed, it has to be said, about the budget's lack of clarity on what funding will be available to support the transition towards a clean air zone. Although I think if you looked at the small print, there was an additional amount of money allocated to support local districts in moving towards a cleaner vehicle fleet. The point is, if you add all of these things together, this change is coming now, and it's coming quite quickly. And the question I just want to put out with you this morning, and I've been discussing this with Mark and Doreen and Roger, how do we get GM arrangements that sort of manage this change and get people's input into this change so that it happens in a way that everybody is comfortable with. if you just kind of go through the sort of different phases of it, just so we can kind of see how this plays out. We've got obviously everything we've been doing on Metrolink in the last couple of years in terms of contactless and zonal, and I keep kind of coming back to the point that this is almost the foundation from which we build. You know, we've created a sort of a standard on Metrolink that now needs progressively to be applied to the rest of the system, and that zonal map is the sort of the building block from which we build. Of course, Trafford Park Line is opening a week on Sunday, which I think is worth us just saying, by the way, this morning. Well done, TFGM, and everyone who's been working on it. Bob, if you could pass on certainly my congratulations, I hope of the committee too, because it's quite a good moment, isn't it, nationally, when you've got Crossrail overrunning, HS2 over budget, that we're here saying we're delivering a project 7 months ahead of schedule. I think that's a fantastic statement for Greater Manchester to be making at this particular moment in time, because I think it says something very important about our ability to deliver and deliver ahead of schedule. So the developments we've been doing on Metrolink over the last few years, as I say, almost set the template, and we know there's further aspirations there around Stockport, Bolton, Middleton. I know there's a list. I'm probably offending some people by not adding other places to that list, but you know that might open up a little now with the level of capital funding that is beginning to come through. So if you look at the phases of reform, on top of that, it is a next period, which I would say is largely around bus reform, linked to the development of the B network, because I do think we need to see the B network as very much part of this single vision. And then there's a phase beyond that, which I think maybe is more the 23-4 onwards phase, which is rail reform. I was pleased that the government listened to myself, the Mayor of Liverpool City Region and others in placing the Northern franchise under public control. As we said, it's not resulted in dramatic improvements, but I think there's been certainly a steadying of the ship, if you like. I think it's calmed things to a degree. At Transport for the North yesterday, Northern, the new Northern, gave a presentation in saying that there is a lot of work going on internally to certainly lift the morale of the workforce, which is, I think, important. Develop a 100-day plan for Northern, which is going to be published in around June this year, which will look at operations. Chris might want to say more. We'll look at operations, but also we'll look at some of the infrastructure issues, particularly around central Manchester. One of the disappointing things in the budget was that we didn't get any word on platforms 15 and 16. And I have to report to the committee that I was on platforms 13 and 14 on the morning that the operator of last resort took control, and I stood watching a Network Rail official telling the Secretary of State at great length why platforms 15 and 16 weren't needed, and I did jump in and say I beg to differ, and Greater Manchester begs to differ, but it is frustrating that the rail industry is still arguing, it would seem to me, about what needs to be done in central Manchester. So perhaps it's not surprising that the government couldn't make an announcement in the budget. What we heard yesterday at Transport for the North is that this 100-day plan will bring forward, we hope, a consensus around central Manchester infrastructure capacity. So that is the timetable that we're now working to. But of course, you know, with the operator being under public control, the next phase for me is to start sketching out what local control of GM commuter rail services means within that. And Bob and I are starting to talk about capacity at the TFGM level, to start extra rail capacity, to start thinking about how we construct a GM rail concept, the extent to which that is integrated with Metrolink and the tram train possibilities. They were mentioned in the budget, so the government would appear still to be keen to see developments in that direction. So so that work is at a, let's say, at an earlier stage. You could argue that that's where bus reform was, what, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, but it's certainly a work programme that now needs to sort of intensify in its level of seriousness and resource that is being devoted to it. I think we can make a case for station devolution before necessarily operational devolution. It isn't acceptable still that we have so many of our rail stations inaccessible to wheelchair users. I think if we were to sort of think of stations as part of the GMSF and the land around them, I think we could probably go further in development in town centres and potentially relieving pressure elsewhere. I think there is an early case to start putting forward priority stations for devolved control to come ahead of the major reform, but still, you know, that's something where the details have got to be worked out. Whichever way you look at it, then to get back to my first point, there's a major decade of change coming here, and it will start with a decision on bus reform, which, you know, is coming. We met the bus operators recently, One Bus, Gary, but also individually heard from the bus operators. So we've been listening carefully to all of the responses to the consultation, including those from the bus operators, and, you know, whatever is happening in the wider world and whether or not elections are happening or not happening, you know, we believe it's important to bring these discussions to a decision, and that will happen in the not too distant future. So then I suppose what I just want to say in closing, Mark, before perhaps opening up to people's questions, is how do we manage this decade of change together is the question, and what is the role of this committee, and how do we give a clearer role maybe to this committee? Because I'd heard the concern, and I think this came through last time I came. What is, you know, in the change GM arrangements, how do we kind of get focus in what we're doing? Because we're going to need to focus. There's a huge amount here that needs to be managed and managed very carefully and very properly. And it seems to me that the issue is where GM functions hit districts and that interface between these two things. So the B network, obviously, you know, it's got to be often locally determined, but then obviously GM funded, and it's in the space of crossover. Bus reform, the same. You know, you will know what you want for your districts from a reformed bus system in Greater Manchester. And it seems to me to be the committee's role to ensure that districts are getting what they need and what they want from the reform programme that's coming through at a GM level, and particularly in terms of vehicle specification, those things, you know, having the views of residents fed in very much. There's the whole question of roadworks. I think we were just hearing a concern about how poor management of roadworks at times can hinder the performance of the bus system. You know, we can't always be sort of looking to others to say, oh, this isn't good enough and that's not good enough, and not take it upon ourselves at times to improve what we do. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we should be better at managing roadworks across Greater Manchester, both in terms of the level of coordination between the 10 districts through the GM RAP system, but also perhaps having more direct devolved control of the strategic route network through Highways England. We are making arguments for more powers over the highways. Pleased to see the government confirm yesterday that it is looking at tougher measures against pavement parking. That, I think, is something that we should strongly support in Greater Manchester. But you could extend that to more powers over yellow box junctions, over overrunning of utility company roadworks. There's a package of measures there that I think need consideration, and I think this committee needs to sort of be at the heart of those debates about getting a package of measures on better management of our highways. There's the question of taxi standards, which has been moving forward through the districts and very much district driven, but again, you know, how do we align that with any policy decisions on the clean air zone at the GM level and make sure those two things are moving in isolation? I suppose the point I'm kind of making is it's how does this change get managed when it is about the 10 districts and GM trying to manage it together? And that for me is where the committee has its most important role to play in sort of overseeing those big policy changes as they come forward and making sure we get the balance right and it doesn't feel like it's all GM imposed, because of course you won't much want that. So that, Chair, is where I see things as we sit here this morning. I think we're in a better position than probably we've ever been in terms of the level of consensus around Greater Manchester's vision for where it wants to go in the next decade. The funding is beginning to be unlocked to deliver it. We can even see change on our streets at the moment with the emergence of electric buses, which has been very, very good to see. But, you know, I think we now need to get ourselves ready for what is coming. And actually, if we listen to what TFGM are saying, I think they are saying that we will need very different governance arrangements and internal arrangements if we're to manage what is a programme of change on an unprecedented scale. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Andy. Questions? I've got Doreen first.
It's not really a question, it's more a comment. I mean, I've been on this committee a few years, and it's one of the best transport budgets I've known through successive governments, the budget that we've been given. We've not got everything, but whoever does get everything. In comment to your 15 and 16 platforms, Andy, I totally agree with you. That I feel that TFGM have taken their eye off the ball with those two, because we used to lobby strongly for the Orsal curve and 15 and 16, and the two working together would open up lines. We got the Orsal curve, but we didn't get 15 and 16. But I've not seen it on a report for ages, and probably it's my fault I've not said it. But I think we should be lobbying government strongly, and if they thought it was that important, they would have done more with it. And my other comment is, I absolutely agree with you about buses and everything you've said. The cars on pavements, I only worry, no, they shouldn't be there, absolutely. But you've got so many people in terraced houses, and they've all got cars. Where would those, they're not going to all give up the cars, are they? It really needs thinking about. You need a communal car park or something around terrace streets for them to go. That's my comments. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Thank you, Doreen. Yeah, I think if we go back, we've got to go back to the original vision, haven't we? We never separated this vision, because originally it was the Northern Hub, wasn't it? It was, I mean, I remember as an MP being asked to go out and bat for the Northern Hub, which was a complementary set of investments, wasn't it? Ordsall, Cord, Deansgate, Oxford Road, and then all the way through. And I think the problem is it's been chopped into pieces now, and that adds, I think, to the complexity of it. But just to reassure you, when TFGM have been pushing the case, we did make a budget submission on it, because there was a review of it last year by Network Rail, and as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, colleague from Network Rail or indeed Northern, it was kind of reluctantly concluded that it probably was needed still. So it's kind of frustrating to hear it's still sort of being debated. So, you know, then again, we've also, just to add to the complexity in some ways, we had this Richard George review of Manchester Piccadilly with respect to HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. You'll know that we've never been convinced about the north-south terminus for HS2, which would make the Northern Powerhouse trains come in and then go out, you know, on the surface. As part of that, a review of that, which I think was helpful to us because it's kind of opened up the idea that we might substantially reconfigure Piccadilly, Richard George has said that all of these issues now need to be considered as, in terms of one plan for central Manchester, which is probably logical, but it might further sort of delay what's needed on the Castlefield corridor. So it's a really confusing picture, if we're honest. I think I'm seeing nods from railway colleagues. We know it's difficult, and we know there's lots of moving parts here. But what we heard yesterday was there will be an answer from the railway industry at the end of this 100-day period of the new Northern management. And I guess I found that was good enough for yesterday. You know, if we could have at least some white smoke from the railway industry to say, this is what we all now agree on. You know, we do have to have a mind for the disruption that 15 and 16 would bring, because it would be considerable. And we'd have to kind of manage it with everything else we've got on. But I mean, until someone tells me otherwise, I lobby for it, and that's why I jumped in when the Secretary of State was getting told that it wasn't a good idea, because no one's told me that since I came into this job that it's not a good idea. And Chris Grayling's digital railway, I'm afraid, has definitely not flown as an idea. So, but I think we do need to work as one on this, and we need a plan for Castlefield. There is going to be changes to the timetable, though, later this year. In the interim, services, they're going to remove the number of train paths, or reduce the number of train paths. And the train they've selected is my train from Newtley Willows, which is not great, but still taking one for the team. I'm prepared to do it. But so the December 2020, you will see a more resilient timetable, I think, than we've had since May 18. And that's where we're up to at the moment. On pavement parking, you're absolutely right to say that. And I'm not saying blanket. You know, I don't think we would, if we were given those powers, I don't think you would in any way use them in an indiscriminate way on every pavement. I think where we're putting investment into the B network, though, I think you would protect the B network. I don't think it would be sensible to create segregated cycling paths that then have kind of cars over them or, you know, obstructing them. I think where we're talking about really important routes that older and disabled people use to get out to shops and that kind of thing, I think we do need to sort of think about a targeted use of these powers in those places, and then possibly progressively extending them as long as those parking issues that you rightly highlight, Doreen, can be addressed.
Okay, I've got a few members that want to ask questions, so if I take them in twos. I've got Peter and Nathan.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 2 points, Andy. I'm glad you've got money to invest in the stations, and I've forever been a supporter of disabled access and an advocate. We have a list of 10 priority stations that we used to have published in the documents, but I've not seen it for a while. Are we going to look at them again and reprioritise them? And secondly, I sit on the out of London adjudication panel. It's called Patrol, and they've, for as long as I've sat on it, advocated that we got the powers over yellow box junctions. London have a London-wide parking ban on footpaths, unless it's a designated area. And again, it's going back to your favourite thing, London-centric. They have the powers to do it. The only other place that has powers over yellow boxes is Wales. The rest of England don't have any powers on it. I'd just like your opinion.
Thank you, Chair. Feeling a little bit like a stuck record. I asked this question a year ago. The hour pass, and so we've had anecdotal comments that it's been successful from users, which you're going to get because they've got a free pass. I appreciate that. At no point, and I've asked you before, have we set out and what success and failure looks like for this. And I appreciate we've got a report coming out in a week, but all this is after the £15 million was committed, as I would hope you'll remember. And the same, I do worry as we embark on these things that we don't know what success and failure looks like. And if we can't do it on 15 million, then how can we do it on 170 million for the franchising concept? So that's question one. And the second one is on small business support for private light goods vehicles within the clean air zone. We all know the jobbing decorator and the jobbing builder. We all know that guy that jumps in his van and does a bit. He has no idea that he's going to have to pay this in 2023. He's driving around in a 10-year-old van and he's going from Marple to Reddish, perhaps West Orton to Bolton, nowhere near a pollution zone, but he's going to get hit with a £4,000 a year cost. I know we've been given 32 million to implement this, and I put freedom of information requests into both GMCA and TFGM to find out what lobbying we have done. I've been told we have written to government, but I've not seen that. Those small businesses, those micro businesses, are the ones that are going to need super support. They are never, they might get a £4,000 grant, but they are never going to be able to afford a £15,000, £20,000 van. And those people are going to seriously suffer, and they're the ones I am personally lobbying for. I do operate 2 vans myself, but I can afford to change them. But those one-man vans won't be able to. How are we going to help them?
So, Peter, there is still a list, or I think TFGM are probably looking again at the priority list for a group of stations that could come as a sort of pathfinder group for rail station devolution. 10, 12, something in that space. I think the committee needs to have a look at that list before it's finalised. I mean, obviously, it's about getting spread across the districts, but also stations that are would lend themselves to a more devolved treatment because of the possibilities that they offer. I think we need to move on with that piece of work. I think if we were exploiting the stations themselves from a commercial point of view, or the land around them, building around them, I think we could unlock funding to go back into those stations and make them disability accessible much more quickly than waiting for the way the things grind through with Network Rail. Swinton got some money in the budget, which was great because we'd all lobbied about Swinton. It was particularly inaccessible and a bit important station. But we can't work on this one station every budget sort of approach. We'll be here forever waiting for our stations to become accessible. So the list does exist. We have lobbied on it. It went cool because we had a massive push and Chris Grayling turned it down. That was in the summer of 2017. So it's kind of struggled to kind of get going again. But it would appear to be back on the agenda, and we're certainly taking that forward. You are right about the box junctions. It's very frustrating. And I think this point's now been accepted nationally, hasn't it? That what's good enough for London is going to have to be good enough for other places. And I think the debate has moved very decisively in our favour. And I mentioned it to the roads minister just on a phone call a couple of days ago that we wanted this power to enforce box junctions. We've created a new travel unit at GMP with the extra resources that have gone in. So there is a potential for more police enforcement, particularly in the city centre, on nights when we know when there's a game at Old Trafford or Etihad, you know when you're going to potentially get that even disruption to the trams because the cars are in the yellow box junctions. So that's under consideration, but I don't think it's a solution. We need to ask for those powers, and we are doing, and hopefully they will come through soon. Nathan, on the question of the R-Pass and the cost of it, I mean, I don't know what others hear, but I hear kind of very kind of dramatic reports of how it's changed a lot of young people's lives in Greater Manchester, and that was obviously the main reason for doing it. On the latest figures that I've got, nearly 39,000 card holders, which is pretty much there or thereabouts as to what TFGM predicted. They have taken 6.5 million bus journeys so far. So I'm asking TFGM to kind of show what this means for bus patronage over the 30 years since deregulation. But I think there is correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, but there is a sense that the bus journeys are helping stem the decline of bus patronage, and obviously that was a significant part of this policy. It is about a social intervention for young people, connecting them with opportunity, be it apprenticeships, studying, jobs. But it is also a transport intervention to get more people back using buses. And there's hopefully a crime and an antisocial behaviour sort of benefit that comes, and a reduction in numbers of NEETs. But these are the things that are all being considered as part of the pilot. It is within budget. The 15 million it is currently within budget at the moment, and we will. I think we're briefing leaders on it at the leaders meeting next week, and of course we'll bring a paper to this. It's not even, is it 6 months yet? It's getting up to 6 months old, isn't it? At the end of this month, or it was end of February, I think. So we're getting to a point where we can put some meaningful data before you, and we will do, so that people can see how it's shaping up. One of the most encouraging things for me is when we've looked at take up across the 10 districts. It isn't all concentrated in what you might call let's say the wealthier areas. It's often take-up is highest in some of our poorest communities, which is very positive, I think. On the question of the clean air zone, your concerns are my concerns. I keep saying I don't want to see a single job lost or a single business go bust as a result of a clean air zone. But there is a but. This is an instruction from the government. And the last meaningful communication we had from them in response to our bid for a clean van fund alongside other funds is that they weren't going to able to commit the funds to it, but they would pay for the enforcement cameras. So that is where we are with it, Nathan. And I mean, I don't want to make this political at all, actually, but you know, if you're talking about a lobbying campaign, I have said to ministers, this could become a Tory clean air tax if we're not careful, because if there is no funding, and if we're doing this through enforcement, I think that would be the worst thing we could possibly do, because it would become a very divisive, resented issue for the reasons that you gave. I don't think, and Simon is leading on this, that we just have the resources at the GM level. If there was no funding for a clean van fund, I don't see how we would be able to do this. We could create a loan finance function, maybe at the GMCA, to let people borrow to buy a van, but I don't know if that would cover the number of SMEs that we've got. So I don't want to make it political. I want us all to lobby government to unlock the funding, and maybe there's funding now that comes in this budget. It's still our preference to delay the introduction of vans into the clean air zone until 2023. And that was also rejected by the government. I mean, the reason being that the van market is much less mature than the electric taxi and cleaner HGV market. That was our logic for asking for that. So if they're not giving us that dispensation and they're not giving us the funding, this is a pretty disastrous story for our small businesses. And I do think we probably need your help, other Conservative members' help, and all of us to sort of play a message back to say, look, they do need to give us confirmation of funding so we can create a business loan support scheme to help them switch vehicles.
Okay. Sorry. Well, can we ask others questions? Go on then.
We're on the same page on that, on the vans. My last comment on RPAS, I won't come back to it again. We seem to be creating what success looks like from what it's delivered. I would have liked to have seen 6 months ago, if we can get 5 million journeys, that will be success. I then feel happy to give you 15 million quid. We didn't do that, and now we're creating what success looks like. It seems that way from my side. And I would just say, when we embark on these projects, if we could paint it out, this is what it's going to look like. That's it, really. That will be my last intervention on that. Thank you.
Okay, the next two, I've got John and then Warren.
Thank you, Chair. Just one brief comment and two brief questions, if I can. I'm alarmed to hear Network Rail was arguing that we don't necessarily need Platform 15 and 16. I think it would be good to know exactly what Network Rail are saying, and then we can look at how we might disassemble the arguments that they're making going forward. That was my comment. My two questions, you mentioned the possibly 800 million capital investment. Just wondered whether there's any suggestion of strings attached to that money. And secondly, you've shown a commitment to concessionary passes, which I think is very laudable. I still remain concerned that disabled people who require companions to travel, the companions do not get concessionary passes, and effectively the disabled people that require a companion end up having to pay for their companions to travel, to allow them to travel, so effectively they don't get concessionary travel. I just wondered whether further consideration had been given for companion passes for people who specifically require a companion to travel.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to mention the clean air, but I'll start off with that. As you know, I've continually complained about the fact that Highways England are immune from this legislation, and we need to do something to stop that immunity. Many councillors around this room have roads that are controlled by Highways England, and the clean air zones that have been declared, many of them are contaminated by those Highways England roads. And as far as I'm aware, there has been no move to bring Highways England into this legislation. The other thing that I wanted to raise was about Roadworks. Many, many years ago, I went on a lobby of Parliament to try and end the monopoly that the statutory undertakers have on the electricity cables that run under our roads. Many, many times local authorities are blamed for roadworks taking too long, when in fact it's the statutory undertakers who will not do it in the times that they don't care about it's a major bus route and it's holding up traffic and all the rest of it. They've got their own appointments and their own workload. What we need to do is end that monopoly once and for all, so that electricians who are at the same qualifications as the people that the statutory undertakers have, they have the qualifications to do the work, but they're standing around a hole in the ground and they can't do it because it's not their property and they're not allowed to. That monopoly has got to stop.
Well, thanks, John. I think you're right about 15 and 16. I think we're all in the same place, obviously Doreen too. So the ball's in the railway industry's court, really. They need to tell us what they are going to do to improve capacity in central Manchester. And this 100-day deadline, I think, is going to have to be it. You know, otherwise we'll have to become much more vocal about it. But appreciate the support. On the 800 million, yeah, it is different to the way they allocated what was called transforming cities going back to 2017. Back then we got an allocation of 243 million. That actually came, it was surprising because it was GM announced in the budget of that year and it didn't come with any strings, which was surprising. And if you recall, I prioritised the 2/3 of it for cycling and walking, which I thought might get challenged by the government, and it never did. And which was then encouraging, really, around the way this devolved capital might work. I think they've taken a step back towards a more control approach this time, because it says that mayors will have to present ambitious plans to ministers for their priorities. So there's kind of a kind of control mechanism been introduced here, which seems a step back from devolution. We have a government that's talking more about it, which is slightly odd, to say the least. So there are strings attached, unfortunately, and the reference was to tram train within our £800 million. So whether we would all choose to kind of prioritise that at this moment in time, I don't know, is a debatable point. So if effectively the instructions, we'd only get our money if we went for tram train, I don't know. So, but you're right to raise concerns about this, because it's not as encouraging as it might have been when you look at some of the small print in the budget papers. On the companions pass, certainly not against it, and I think London have it, but partly because London can afford it, and it would just be, I think most of us would see the case for it around this table, and I certainly do. The question is, with all of our other issues, and we're just talking about our pass and other challenges, could we find a way of doing it? But I think the point you make is not one I would argue with. I think it's from an equity point of view, it's what we should do, but it's about having the funding to do it, and we'd have to keep that under review. But the principle of it, I'm definitely not against and would support. So thank you for your questions, Warren. As I understand it, Highways England are under a separate instruction from the government. So the 10 districts are under a legal instruction, but Highways England are as well. The difference being they have not gone public with any measures, as far as I understand it, about what they will do to react to that legal instruction. If you think about it, think about our motorways, they really do come close, don't they? I mean, true in your part of the world, in Tameside, the motorway's going pretty close, isn't it, to Denton and obviously then into Stockport and coming round, the M602 goes right into the heart of Salford. These are not motorways that are away from residential areas, are they? They're very, very close. And I've said to them, I don't think it is acceptable for them to think of themselves as separate to what we're doing. The only benefit, of course, is that if a car comes off, it would only allow through traffic on our motorways, and it wouldn't allow people to come off those motorways. But still, I don't think that's a good enough answer at the moment, and we need to carry on pressing them. You're you're right about lane rental. You know, the overrunning of utility works is and it's exactly the same issue that Peter raised about London has it, we don't. It's one of those issues in that particular box. But I do come back to the point about we've also got to show our own houses in order before we're always saying why can't we have and if we're honest, are we doing a good enough job on the coordination of roadworks? Is every scheme that's developed in the districts going on GM wraps? I'm told it's not. So I'm sorry if this is a little bit challenging, but I think we do need to both ask for what we need, but also be challenging of ourselves. I think districts do need to challenge each other sometimes, because I hear some districts put more on than others, and I think we do have to have a bit of a tougher look at all of this, because if we want to be at a world-class level on transport, we've got to be standard across what we do across the 10. And this is exactly an area where I think the committee is better driving it than me. No one's going to like me wandering in saying, oh, you're not doing your roadworks properly. I don't think that's going to go down particularly well. But I think the committee could say, look, here's a position with GM wraps, here's who's using it, here's who's not using it, and do some peer-to-peer challenge about it and strengthen it. I think that's it. For me, that is exactly where the committee now really adds value in terms of the step change that we want to see in terms of the management of our transport system across all modes.
Okay, thank you. I've got Matt and David.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome the comments from Andy on disabled access and not taking a station at we can't do a station at a time approach to this. It needs to be something that has a lot more emphasis on. Indeed, we've got a gentleman, a friend of mine there, Nathaniel Yates, at the back, who is speaking with TFGM officers later on today to talk about disabled access at stations. It's something he's done a lot of passionate campaigning about. So I do welcome those comments that we need, if we can get the money to push on with this. But my question is just in relation, it links into platforms 15 and 16. But my understanding is that obviously we can have platforms 15 and 16 at Manchester Piccadilly, but we've got a problem further up the line at Stockport where we need the capacity there in order for then platforms 15 and 16 to be realised further down, because ultimately if we don't have the capacity further up the line, it could get problematic with having 2 additional platforms at Piccadilly. So I'm just curious in terms of what work is being done from the Network Rail side, if anything. I mean, obviously the comments are a bit concerning if they don't believe we need 15 and 16. Obviously, that means then, do they believe we need the capacity further up the line? So I'd be curious to know if Transport for the North or others are pushing on this really from our perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine's also on the railways. I know I've seen at the budget that that the City Region's due to get capital funded in 2022, and the Williams review is rolling on. I'm just wondered, as part of this 100-day plan, has it been put on the table anything about fare reductions? I mean, the monstrosity that was the railway franchise when the River Rail North had it. Before that, the evening peak rail fare period was introduced between 4.5 6. Fares were hiked by about 20 to 25% for off-peak fares over the last 4 or 5 years. So I'm just wondering if anything's been put on the table about reversing them. You know, patronage is flatlined. We've got the clean air zone coming up where, private vehicles aren't included. So I'm just wondering if anything's been put on the table or just about them 2 elements about the evening peak rail period. We're trying to get people to work flexibly, the congestion deal that was posed. But people aren't going to, we need to regain trust. We need to see reparations from the government for the last couple of years. We can't say that now they've got the franchise, that's it. I'm just wondering, Andy, if as part of this 100-day plan, whether the reversal in increases in fares has been considered, and also the evening peak zone period. Thank you very much.
David, I think I didn't realise Nathaniel was here. He's just gone out as well, because I was aware of the petition that he'd launched. He presented it to me, and I just think I think we need to get angrier and louder about the fact that how many stations? 98 stations, 97 50% not wheelchair accessible. I mean, it's more outrageous than... There's a lot of outrageous things with our transport system, but I think that is right up there in the top 2 or 3, you know, of things that are just so wrong. And it can't be the case that we do it, as you say, one by one. So I think going back for the argument for GM rail devolution, I think should make that argument number one. You know, we want all of our citizens to be able to use our train stations. That is not that is an absolutely basic demand that we make on behalf of everybody who lives here. And as I say, I think if we were to link it to GMSF and building around stations, I think we could quickly unlock the modest levels of planning gain funding that would be needed to modify those stations. A new approach is needed, and I think with the Williams review coming, we think well, the last I heard was mid-June sort of time. Well, maybe a bit earlier than that, May June time. You know, that's our opportunity to do it. Just want to pay tribute to Nathaniel, by the way, because it's been a fantastic campaign that he's run. On Castlefield Corridor, you're right, it's not just Piccadilly. I know this is what I was saying to Doreen, you know, we've kind of cut this into chunks, and we should never have done it really, you know, because it's all one problem. And Oxford Road, you know, look at Oxford Road Station. I mean, it needs desperately new investment, doesn't it? Both in terms of track and signalling, but also the station facilities. What I'm told is, alongside this 100-day plan that the operator of last resort is building up, there is a Castlefield or Central Manchester task force which involves all of the TOCs, Network Rail, and I don't know whether TFGM are on it as well. So those things are being looked at, David, and I think, you know, another push will be needed. It's going to be June, I think, by the time this 100-day plan comes out, and the work of the task force is feeding into it. So, you know, you're absolutely right to raise those issues. So, Matt, you know, that you're right about trust. You know, it is and has been at rock bottom. I think there's some signs of improvement. I mean, let's not always just focus on Northern, because TransPennine's performance has been worse in recent months. And, you know, disastrously so. So at times through the Christmas period, you know, it was down in the sort of 30s, even 20s levels of reliability. So with what's happened with Northern, I made it clear yesterday at the Transport for the North meeting that this doesn't mean the pressure's off with TransPennine. Absolutely not. So what we said yesterday when we had them before us is that we expect a plan to be developed for improvement, both mid-year this year and end of year, when they are saying that they will be at. And if they are not at that level, then they can expect consequences not dissimilar from those that Northern had to deal with. You know, it's just not, the accountability's not been there in this railway. And what we are trying to do through TfN is put it in. And I think with some success, you know, we're getting a better purchase on the system finally, but it's not good enough. To be fair, TP have been introducing new trains. Some of the Northern new trains are coming through, so there is improvement for passengers, and the trust may begin to come back. But specifically to answer your question, we were told directly yesterday that nothing new has been put on the table. So the operator of last resort has come in and has been told it must work within the financial envelope that Northern was working in. So there is no additional funding to do the things that you are calling for around off-peak, and also there'll be no enhancements. GM could have expected service enhancements in the franchise. Effectively, they are not happening now. So I'm afraid it's not a positive story, but it might get, I expect services to get gradually better as this year wears on, as the new trains really bed in, and I think the new operator of last resort integrates Network Rail a little bit better, and there's a closer sort of sense of working around the new operator of last resort, which I think will bear dividends in time. I do think we all need to think now about the Northern staff on the railways. You know, I think they've had a really tough time, and certainly we're going to be trying to sort of, we made it clear yesterday that, you know, we want now to, you know, we've made our points, we've got the change we wanted. I think we all now need to rally round this railway operator a little bit and sort of help it come back together and recover.
Okay, I've got two more people and I'm going to move on. So I've got Phil and Angeliki.
Andy, it's great to see all the different schemes you're implementing, the clean air policy, the cycle lanes, the bus lanes, and it's good that you use Manchester as a flagship city to host them all. But what starts in Manchester seems to end in Manchester. By the time it gets to the district, it's that watered down. There's not much left for us to do when it comes to funding. And with everything being so tight in funding, we seem to miss out. Take, for example, the bus lanes. I've tried for several years now. We've got bus lanes from Middleton to Victoria Avenue. We can't afford to fund them ourselves. We've asked for help. There's been no help there. Maybe yourselves could look at this again and give us the opportunity to have these bus lanes. The lanes itself are white elephants, and it's a laughing stock in Middleton when people are trying to use the bus, but they don't want to use the bus because we've got poor, shoddy bus operators operating in Middleton. We're trying to get them out of the cars, but they're not getting out of the cars. They're using the bus lanes because it's a faster way to get into the city centre.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Mayor for doing a really, really good job of holding the government to account on transports and of challenging them for the chronic underinvestment that we have on our transport in Greater Manchester, as well as for challenging them for, let's say, taking off the ball, their eye off the ball regarding rail performance in Greater Manchester. Also, great work has taken place with regards to creating the vision for transport in Greater Manchester, as well as the powers that we need in order to be able to deliver that. So we had lots of questions around rail devolution. We spoke about the consultation for the franchise scheme for buses, also more supports and funds for active travel, and the case for increased central Manchester infrastructure capacity, Piccadilly, Oxford Roads, the Castlefield corridor, all very, very important in terms of giving people a viable alternative and getting them to get out of their cars. You said that the next 10 years are going to be very, very important in terms of getting it right, getting the governance right around transport, but also getting our priorities right and the ability to deliver all of these powers, hopefully, that are heading our way. The other thing that is very, very important, actually, is the next 5 years. We know across Greater Manchester that in the next 5 years we have a unique opportunity to get to act in order to become a zero-carbon conurbation. And we have got very, very ambitious plans in order to do that, again, also led at Greater Manchester level. So I guess my question is, as transport accounts for over 33% of the carbon emissions in the conurbation, how can, what is the role of this committee in terms of supporting and accelerating the vision to decarbonise transport and respond to the climate emergency, as well as support the vision for better transport across Greater Manchester? How can this committee complement the powers that the Mayor has on transport, as well as the powers that the leaders have in terms of transport? And how can we all, if you like, work together in a better and sort of more coordinated way, so that we don't miss the opportunities, and also we keep some of our stakeholders into account better? Thank you.
Very important question, so thanks, Angley. Well, Phil, to start with yours, I appreciate what you said. I mean, we are wanting to promote, let's say, Greater Manchester as the flagship. The government is talking about northern transport investment, which is good and, you know, long overdue. If we're honest, we are the only place set up to deliver a pace that I think is what the government would want. So we have to recognise the moment that we're in, and we have to, recognise that if we, some may not want us to succeed, but it's really important that we keep focused at this particular moment in time, and keep our kind of set prioritisation really clear, and really, not lose that sort of position that we're in. We're in pole position, but it's a case of now really kind of making it work. And that means, I think, also being able to respond to this growing political question that we have, which is kind of where your question is coming from, about cities and towns. So there's a sort of debate going on, isn't there? Can you sort of knit the two together and help both sort of rise together, or is it always a case of the city's growing and it's getting harder for the outlying areas? When I was in answer to John Leach's question, when I was answering about the B network, and I think a few eyebrows were raised, if we're honest, about devoting that level of money to cycling and walking, it was very much in my thinking that was a way of getting investment to all districts. If you just go with the way of saying, oh, it's a tram line somewhere, you get one borough benefits, but everywhere else doesn't. And obviously that kind of investment was about kind of spreading it round. And, last time I've checked, I think, the money has pretty much gone round the 10 districts. And I think we need to stick to that principle, that this is about moving the money fully around the city region. So we've got 800 million. So let's say that's going to be sort of a couple of 100 million a year for 4 years from 22, 23. We've got some choices to make, and I think that will allow us to carry on building the B network at the scale that we're building at the moment, but something else as well. And I think we need to make sure that we're getting the balance right between the city and outlying areas. When it comes to sort of not seeing the benefit, well, with bus reform, obviously it's still in the realms of a decision to be taken, but the TFGM assessment had said that Wigan and Bolton should be the first area to benefit from any new scheme on the buses. So I think your point is taken and understood about how reforms need to not just be city-centric, but need to be considered around the buses, although, as I say, we've not yet taken final decisions on buses. You talk about bus lanes. One thing I think we do need to think about is, as the B network now kind of ramps up in terms of delivery, is can some of this investment going into cycling and walking provision also help with bus lane delivery, if that is needed? I think there is more work to be done there to sort of kind of add that dimension into the B network consideration. And so, we'll certainly hear what you say about your area and take that back. Angeliki, thank you so much for what you said at the beginning around it has been a case of sort of making greater advocacy for transport issues in the north, and I think myself, Dan Jarvis, Steve Rotherham and others have hopefully managed to do that in recent times. But it is about also developing the plan, and the last 3 years for me has been very much about getting a vision, basically. I think we've got that now, and it's been great that everyone's kind of fed into it. We kind of know what we want to do, and it's about delivery now, isn't it? I think this phase has been about develop the vision and the plans. The next phase is, I think, about delivery. And if I look at where we're going to need the committee's support, it's kind of making the argument that delivery is not just about capital, it's about revenue support for public transport. We've talked about concessions of various kinds today, the R-Pass, Companions Pass. The level of bus fares is just still too high. We've got to get ourselves to a position where public transport is financially more attractive than the car, and it isn't in that position at the moment because of the way it's structured. The cost of a bus, and then you don't get that taken off the cost of your tram ticket. We need to get to a position where public transport is much more, to go to what the agenda you're punting to, we've got to completely change the finances of transport. And I think that means we need revenue support for public transport of the kind that London has had for many years. And there's still no talk of revenue support. It's all capital and infrastructure at the moment. But at some point that's going to need to change if we're to get a public transport system that will support decarbonisation and people's changing behaviour. The word you use is coordination, and I think that is the key word here. If we are moving into delivery and real change on the ground, us coordinating with all of you and Highways leads, Cabinet leads, is going to be absolutely crucial. I don't think we've got time anymore. You know, if you look at taxi standards linked to the clean air zone, that is a piece of work that just needs to move quite quickly. As soon as we get any money out of the government on taxis, we need to create a scheme. We need to go. We need to make that change start to happen. And as you say, I think you were kind of hinting at this, not alienating stakeholders who are watching this on the outside at the moment and sort of worried about what it might mean for them. That's where we'll lose people. And it's going to be really problematic for us if we get any stakeholders like the taxi industry sitting on the outside thinking that GM is getting it wrong or is doing stuff to them that isn't fair. So we really will need to work hard at that level of coordination. And I think we need to think about, we do need to worry about the van drivers, and that's a coming issue, but the taxi industry particularly needs clarity from us on what are the taxi standards requirements, what are the clean air requirements, when are both of them coming in, and how can they get help to meet both sets of standards without it putting them out of business or laying people off. That is basically the bottom line. And if we're going to rise to those kind of challenges, it does require a much greater degree of coordination, I think, between districts and TFGM and myself. So thank you for what you said. I think GM's opportunity now is kind of in pole position when transport funding is coming, but also we have this 2038 commitment across the city region. The carbon commitment is going to be the driver of better public transport for our residents. And I think we've got to go with that. Not hold back now, not delay, not drag our feet, go with it and make this change happen. And I think it's really overdue, to be honest.
Okay, thank you very much for your attendance today, Andy.
You're welcome.
And we hope to see you again soon.
You will. Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to take poetic license here for the chair point of view. Can we move travel safe to the next on the agenda, please? Purely because they've got covert meetings that are coming up shortly. So if I can move over to travel safe, please. Lucy?
Just a quick introduction, if I may, Chair. This is a short report giving an overview of Travel Shape Partnership and its achievements. What we'd like to do is to use a short presentation to supplement the report, and then we'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Lucy Kennan from TFGM. I introduce my colleague, Chief Inspector Gareth Firth from Greater Manchester Police's Transport Unit. As I said, we've got a short presentation just to supplement the report. So just first off, to give a bit of context to where Travel Safe has come from, and I presented to the committee in August last year. Obviously, Travel Safe started life as a 3-year partnership back in 2015 and has evolved and went through a reformation in 2018 to get us to where it currently is. It's led through Transport for Greater Manchester and Greater Manchester Police with support from a range of operators, Metrolink, the bus operators, the Combined Authority and also British Transport Police in more recent times. We have published our strategy. I've brought a few copies of that along from me today if people are interested, which broadly sets out what it is that we've agreed to deliver against, which is effectively 3 strategic aims around improving the perceptions of safety on public transport, managing instances of crime and antisocial behaviour, and also working jointly with our different resources to discourage fare evasion. We've also been establishing our governance and accountability lines, which I think was something that we mentioned at the last committee, which we now report into the Police and Crime Steering Group and their work action plan as well. I'm not sure how clearly that comes across, but I think you may remember last time I talked about the fact that the partnership, we've worked hard to make our data better. We work to a data-driven approach to help align our resources and determine what our priorities are for joint collective work. What we've been trying to do is bring all the different data sources together so that we've got more of a robust and also holistic view of what is actually happening out there. And from this, we've developed a new KPI measure that we can look at, which effectively normalises our data to the number of incidents per million passenger journeys. Now, presenting the data in this way does now help us make comparisons to other areas, in particular TfL, who also present their statistics in this way. So although you won't be able to see it from the graph, it is detailed in the report. What you can see, because we're now in a position to make a year-on-year comparison, so what you can see is the overall rolling number of incidents per million passenger journeys on public transport has reduced to 26 in 29 from 31 in 2018. So just to demonstrate some of the impact that we are having with our joint activities here. To delve a little bit then into the individual modes, what that looks like in 2019 versus 2018 for bus has overall, it's a 22% reduction in the number of in the crime and antisocial behaviour that's been reported through to the partnership. That's been driven particularly 29% reduction of incidents occurring in and at bus stations, and an 18% of those reported as being on bus or at bus stops. From a Metrolink perspective, that translates into a 9% reduction of incidents reported to the partnership. And to put that into context, obviously in a growing patronage, 7% growing patronage through the same period as well. That translates to a 2% reduction in incidents reported as occurring at stops, and 28 of those occurring on board. There is a further breakdown there, which sort of gives a sort of breakdown line by line, but I appreciate it's not very clear on the slide, so apologies for that. I'll let my colleague, Chief Inspector Firth, just give you a bit of an overview of the new transport unit which launched back end of last year.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, as Lucy alludes to, I head Greater Manchester Police's transport unit, which was launched in November 2019. The key aims for that were to provide a proactive policing presence across all transport platforms, so around the buses, Metrolink, but also to respond, and the Mayor touched on it earlier, around the enforcement around seat belts, mobile phones, and those issues that your communities talk to you about on a daily basis. So understanding that some of the traffic officers are dealing on a very routinely basis around collisions, there was a concern that those issues that your communities talk about were not dealt with as proactively as they should have been. So my team are now enforcing some of those low-level issues that your communities talk about. The transport unit comprises of myself as the Chief Inspector. I have 2 inspectors, 5 sergeants and 57 constables. They're spread across 5 teams, a sergeant and 10, generally speaking, across each team. And they deploy from 7 in the morning till 2 o'clock, Sunday to Thursday. And then at the weekend, knowing the vast numbers of people that come into Manchester City Centre from your communities, they provide some additional support to the policing posture on a Friday and Saturday night. It is our aim to provide that visibility across the networks, but also to provide confidence for people coming into the city centre. If there are any crime and disorder issues, then my team will respond to them and will deploy accordingly. What I'd like to make you aware of is obviously the number of arrests and policing presence that we have generally across all communities. Since November 2019, we've had 102 arrests, 19 weapons recovered. And when I talk about weapons, they are some of the quite scary methods, really. We've had machetes, large kitchen knives and cutthroat razors, which have been found in possession of a number of individuals, and they've obviously been challenged through the court process. Also, there's a number of vulnerable people that I'm sure you're aware use that network, and we've managed to locate 53 missing people. So we talk about enforcement around crime and disorder, which is hugely important. But in terms of those people that are vulnerable in our communities, it's my role as the head of this department to make sure that they are returned safely back to their family members. We publicise, obviously, all the significant arrests we do to make sure your communities are aware of them, and we also make sure that any policing postures is documented through the Twitter pages. It's important to know that, for your communities, to know that we're out there dealing and responding to those issues that you talked to us about.
Thanks. Just to draw your attention then to a series of achievements that have sort of taken place through 2019. Obviously, I mentioned publication of the 3-year strategy and establishment of our accountability and reporting lines into the Police and Crime Steering Group's annual work programme. We've already provided updates to the Standing Together Priority 3 work stream alongside the Greater Manchester Hate Crime and the Violent Reduction Unit action plans as well. As part of the launch of the Hour Pass, we included a behaviour code of conduct into the terms and conditions of that. Obviously, we've mentioned the Transport Unit's launch in November. One of the big activities of the partnership is pooling our resources to try and prevent some of this happening in the first place. So we've got an extensive community sort of outreach programme, which in 2019 saw us delivering educational inputs to over 30,000 children, which is a significant achievement for us. And we've looked at establishing a local district partnerships both in Oldham and Rochdale, recognising some of the issues that we have, particularly on Metrolink, are prevalent on that line. And that's about us bringing together a whole range of different partners to try and pool our resources and also the powers that we have collectively, whether that's through the community safety teams in the local authority, the youth engagement teams, alongside the transport unit and the divisional resource that is, so that we can provide a bigger presence to help problem solve some of the issues that we're experiencing those. And they're pilots for us really to see how we can take lessons from that and roll that elsewhere across the network. In terms of a forward look, I'll go on to in 1 second just the Travel Safe campaign, which hopefully you know about and is live at the moment. The partnership has supported Bury Council's successful achievement, a reaccreditation of its Purple Flag scheme around nighttime economy, and in particular were nominated in the movement category, which recognised its safe transport links. We've worked with the transport unit and across the partnership to establish some baseline around how we, as a partnership, we collectively work around revenue protection, where it aligns with a tactical priority. We've been, I think last time I talked about us aspiring to develop a public-facing reporting system for incidents on crime and antisocial behaviour, which you'll see we've managed to work through that, and now we've got an offer on the table. The Travel Safe website has been relaunched, which means it's now more of a live conduit for us to share information, and we're always looking for different ways to further that educational prevention programme through Manchester City Council, Manchester City Football Club, the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Fire Safety Centre in Bury, and also Oldham Athletic as well is coming online. So, the Travel Safe campaign launched on Monday this week. So throughout the course of this week, there's been a series of business as usual activities, with educational inputs, and also we had a Homelessness Day of Action on Tuesday. Now this was about piloting our approach and working with a whole range of agencies. We've developed tools for the partnership staff so that they've got signposting mechanisms when they come across vulnerable people, so that we can refer and support and provide support in that. What you can see, the GIF on screen, this is the social media demonstration how we're now going to use Greater Manchester's live chat system as the conduit for public-facing reporting. So the poster campaign of that will go live from next week across Metrolink assets, bus stations, and also our bus operator colleagues as well. And we've put a series of analytics behind the scenes of the Greater Manchester Police's live chat so that we can actively see what the surge in demand is going to be on that, and what that uplift looks like in terms of people reporting directly from public transport. And then finally, just to sort of bring this together, a bit of a year in pictures to just demonstrate the range of activities we get involved in. There's obviously a series of images there detailing the successes of the transport unit, but then the top right is a day of action that was undertaken at Rochdale Interchange. The middle picture is something Keolis Amy worked with around a Real Men Don't Carry Knives campaign, and obviously the bottom right is support for Bury Council's Purple Flag application. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, got any members ask questions? I've got Phil.
Thanks for the report. It's very interesting to read, but my concerns that relate specifically to Rochdale, please could you provide all statistics from Neway to Rochdale Town Centre since Travel Safe started? Only we get complaints all the time that they never ever see the travel safe police on the system. It's like an invisible police force. Unless they get off in Oldham Town Centre, they never ever come towards Rochdale. Crime's on the increase and we don't seem to be tackling it. People get told, you've quoted here, the figures are down by 70%. The problem we've got is people don't report it because it takes too long to get through to 101. Some people don't have access to a computer, and people are too afraid to report it on the platform. So it's going undetected, the number of real crimes. So these statistics I don't buy into, because you've only got to go down the line yourselves and see for yourself the amount of antisocial behaviour leading into Rochdale and then in Rochdale itself. So I'd like to see the full statistics, station by station, since November up to the present day, please. And the civil injunctions came in February 19. How many have you issued to known individuals, please?
Thank you. I haven't got the breakdown in front of me now in terms of Newhay, but that is something that we can look to provide. And just clarify, since Travel Safe began or since the transport unit launched, just to qualify that.
Since the new unit came into force in November, they've had some good results, but the good results are all South Manchester based, apart from one which I believe was just on the border of Rochdale and Oldham.
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk about, we deploy as per the tactical priorities around where we see the data, which is telling us at this point that it isn't at Rochdale, the threat, harm and risk isn't at Rochdale. We're deploying it in other areas based on that analysis. Having said that, we have cluster working where my staff are routinely deployed to the Oldham, Rochdale and Ashton cluster. So they have that as their base deployments, but they are then given further tactical deployments where we're seeing the risk, harm and threat. So I'd be concerned to hear that you're not seeing visibility along that network, because that's certainly not my aim. But we have to bear in mind that I deploy according to risk, harm and threat. So I'll certainly have a look at that for you and take that back, but I'd be concerned to hear that you're not seeing any visibility.
Is there any consideration about bringing the special constables back on the line?
Yes, we've had a meeting with all the relevant parties. There are 5 or 6 individuals that are reviewing the memorandum of understanding at this point. My understanding that 3 or 4 of them are keen to join back the partnership. Slightly different working, they'll be aligned to a specific sergeant and will deploy with the sergeant. So that aligns their training, welfare specifically to that sergeant as part of that team ethos.
Just to pick up on the points about the method of reporting, one of the principal drivers for utilising live chat has been its discreet method, so that people can report that without fear, as you say, pushing the buttons on the platform or making a call, which is really similar to British Transport Police's 61016 text number. And in respect of the civil injunctions, at this point in time, we haven't taken any through. That's not to say there haven't been cases where they've been highlighted. However, what's happened in most of those cases is it's been more appropriate for the enforcement to be taken through another organisation, either because their behaviour has wider consequences, therefore it's appropriate that we work in partnership with the local authority, or a more stringent method of enforcement, such as a criminal behaviour order, has been sought by Greater Manchester Police. So it's not that we've not been taking enforcement action, it's just it's not been the most appropriate method at that point.
Okay, I've got David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite pleased to see that you've made some inroads with traffic offences. One of the things that I've been found quite frustrating to try and get organised within Stockport is having a series of community speed watches in the area. I'm just wondering whether within the Travel Safe sort of offering, whether there is a capacity in there to begin to roll those out within communities, or to at least begin to consider whether we can have a few more of those watches taking place in particular areas. Because I think from my perspective, while obviously we still continue to try and increase the number of officers that we've lost in the system, communities have got a real sort of passion, obviously, as you know, for this, and I think they'll appreciate it if they can take some ownership of this with some support from yourselves. We can maybe make some inroads on that. So I'll be curious to know whether there's capacity in there to provide anything for this. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we have to bear in mind that this unit has been only 3 months in its inception. So if I give you some honesty, my staff are getting to terms with the equipment that they've been given. So the lasers they are deploying and are now deploying on a daily basis around enforcement. As I'm sure it's well documented in the news, there have been a number of serious and fatal collisions across our communities, which one of those impacts is clearly around speed. So yes, there is enforcement out there from my staff and also from the traffic departments. Can you leave the community angle with me for the time being, and I will look to develop that in the future.
Okay, got Matt.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just got a question for the Chief Inspector. Yeah, I know this unit's in its early days. I'm still just trying to understand its structure. So you've got 57 police constables. How are they split up, though, amongst the different modes of transport? Is it divided into a subunit that focuses on road traffic and the rest focus on the public transport network? It's not very transparent. I mean, are they in the, that's what I mean. I'm trying to understand, are they in the cars one day and then they're on the trains? It's a little bit unclear. Also, I've noticed I've not come across any of the officers because there's nothing that distinguishes them, I don't think. Have they got their own, you know, the vehicle? I know we're in our nappies with this unit, and I'm very excited for it because I see how they work around the world transport units. It's very impressive and it's been long overdue. But I'm just wondering if are we planning to have them to be distinguished, you know, in terms of the vehicle livery, and also on the uniforms as well, so when members of the public are going about, they know how to distinguish. Because I know the tactical aid unit, they have their own, well, they're a different police force in themselves, I say sometimes, but they have their own thing. So, yeah, and just a final point, just on a local issue. I'm just wondering on Stockport railway station on match days, if you guys and BTP can link up, because I've had to travel there in the last couple of Saturdays and there's been absolutely no policing presence. We get a lot of football fans coming through, and I even had to split up a fight last week on the railway platform when, you know, it's the busiest railway station outside of central Manchester. I had to split up a fight because everyone was drunk on the platform, and there was a security guard there with this outsourced company, and it was between me and the railway staff just trying to split it up. It wasn't great, really, and I was expecting at least Saturday evening, football season, BTP or at least GMP to at least one officer to be around. So, but I know you get called away, but I just thought I'd point out just that one local policing issue, Chief Inspector. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so if I just talk around the deployments first of all, generally speaking, there's 5 teams. Two generally are on days. One is based around the visibility of the public transport system. So we'll deploy both Metrolink, bus and in a vehicle. So if the 8 officers, you might expect 4 to be on the Metrolink, 2 to be on the buses and 2 in the vehicles around enforcement in that specific area. So you would expect a good spread of staff across the networks. The other team is then specifically guided towards enforcement. So that may be mobile phone enforcement, speed enforcement, drink drive, drug drive, all the kind of fatal 5 themes that we see daily in the newspapers around things that are bringing harm to our communities. In terms of uniform, they are in the corporate GMP wear. So like me in a polo shirt, they will have a high visibility tack vest, which probably distinguishes them from other police officers, just because they will just be in the normal blacks. They don't wear the blue overalls that you allude to around the tactical aid unit. That's specifically for those deployments. They have those because they're searching obviously crime scenes. So to distinguish would generally be speaking around the high-vis tack vest. In terms of football, the deployments I set are around, we consider all deployments around major public events, certainly around the crowded space theories. We link in with BTP, but you have to accept that, I know there's been announcements about football today, so it's probably not a great example, but we consider all football matches in the GMP area. We consider the information intelligence around those, and then we deploy the numbers of police officers to that. So if it's a low-key game at Stockport, you probably won't see any police officers. Having said that, British Transport Police are aware of the numbers of people that travel across the train, and they will provide an appropriate policing posture on those days.
Okay. Warren?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm hoping that we're going to get a regular report on the agenda from this unit. It's one unit that I did welcome the formation of, and I'll be watching it very closely. What I'd like to ask you is, could you forward to all members of the Transport Committee an electronic copy of your slides?
Yep, we can get that sorted, no problem. Roy?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thanks for reports, everyone says. I was interested in the purple flag for Bury, as a councillor in Bury, because I find Bury at night, probably because I'm of the vulnerable category, the government tells me, frightening place, very frightening place to be in. I've gone with the police at 2 in the morning when I used to be on the police authority, and nothing seems to have changed in the amount of drunkenness. Now, if that's how you think it's doing okay, you helped to get this purple flag, it's a place for me not to go very often at night. But I do go on the bus station, the Metrolink at night. So say 7 till 11, when there's drugs, there's fighting, there's swearing, and people can feel vulnerable. I'm thinking of, I don't want to be sexist, but young ladies on their own coming back from Manchester concert, and they're waiting for a bus. It's a very lonely place, Bury bus station. So I'd like to know, and it's quite frightening for people, males as well, I'll say, at times. So it may not be as serious as some bus stations and so on, but I tended to get the feeling you're improving things on the tram lines, and that's needed doing, and I argued for BTP to do this over 10 years ago when I was involved with BTP. But so I'm glad you're doing that. But how much time does anyone spend on the bus station? Because on Bury, there's no GM staff. There's no staff in the office. It's a very lonely place, and at times you can feel quite frightened. Are you in the Bury bus station at night, 7 till 11 at all? How often?
So yes, the bus station, in the main, the bus interchanges are manned on an early and late shift basis. So before the start of peak until the end of the evening. With the officers that patrol, they do tend to call in to just check in on the staff to check they're okay. They don't tend to spend a lot of time there because they're out on other parts of the network.
The CCTV is pretty good there as well, because I've seen the cameras. So. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to item 8, Rail Performance Report. Bob?
Thanks, Chair. Given the time, I think it's probably best if we go straight over to the respective operators, if we could start with Northern.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Just conscious that quite a bit of this has been covered already, I thought I'd just give a high-level summary of 4 specific areas. Firstly, about the 100-day plan and performance improvement. Secondly, about the May 2020 timetable changes as far as they affect Greater Manchester. A little bit of an update on COVID-19, and finally some specific customer-focused improvements in Greater Manchester. And I'll drop in some of the detail about what's happening at some local stations. Hopefully you'll find that of interest. So the first part about the 100-day plan, you've heard Andy speak about it. That takes us up to June, and it's about taking stock of where we are now. And importantly, it's about building a 5-year plan. And that 5-year business plan is about better punctuality, It's about more capacity and about creating a more engaged workforce. You've heard about that this morning. That plan will be validated by something called the Stakeholder Advisory Panel. That's newly created, and Andy sits on that panel, so you can be assured of some strong representation in that respect. And also, Andy mentioned it, but just to put a bit more flesh on the bones, to get an immediate grip on performance, something called the North West Recovery Task Force has been created. That's multi-agency. It's Northern, TransPennine, TFGM, Network Rail, Department for Transport. They're devising short, medium and long-term actions to improve punctuality and reliability, and you'll see elements of that included in the 5-year business plan as well. So hopefully that's consolidated the things that you've heard in relation to the 100-day plan and the North West Recovery Task Force. To give you a bit about the May 2020 timetable, it's an important milestone for us. We will have all of our 101 brand new trains in operation from the May timetable change, which is a great news story. We'll also have an industry first, a hybrid train, Class 769, so that's half electric, half diesel, will be in operation. 4 of those will be introduced from May, coming through Manchester. And I guess the key soundbite to take away is, with all of these new trains in, and these Class 769s, the peak capacity in and out of Greater Manchester is increased by 3% following the May timetable change. So I know here I've received a lot of feedback about capacity. There is real tangible capacity improvements coming from the May timetable change, so you should, hopefully that's good news. The big winners in terms of routes of that capacity uplift are Hazel Grove to Manchester, Bolton to Manchester on the airport line, and also the PM peak going from Manchester to Warrington Central on the Cheshire lines. So they're all big winners. We're well on the way with our driver training programme. We've now completed 80% of all driver training days, so there really is light at the end of the tunnel from what's been a difficult period. We're also pressing on with our refurbishment programmes, so people with reduced mobility improvements, and also retention tanks on our toilets. But that has taken some toll on unit availability and therefore short forming. You have seen that across Greater Manchester. To give you a flavour, as of today, we've got 22 units out of the plan being modified, digital train, PRM. That gradually reduces over the course of the year, so there'll be 11 out at the end of December. So things will get better, but that's one of the reasons why you've seen some short forms of late. But trust me, things will get better. Based on that, though, I've made a difficult decision to keep on pacers for a little bit longer. So we've got 4 pacers in operation until the May timetable change. I know I got some feedback from this committee last time I came here that people would prefer a train to no train at all. So we have got 4 pacers in operation on routes to Kirkby, Southport and up to Blackburn and Rochdale. So that's just one thing to be aware of. That will continue until May. Lastly, not penultimately, the COVID-19 preparation. We have done a lot of preparation for the virus, but there are vulnerabilities in certain elements and roles within our plan, as you would expect across the sector. Equally, it is such a system that, Network Rail and other operators were working very, very closely together to work on our plan. So, for example, if the virus was to hit a major signalling centre, for example, that would have a big knock-on effect to all of our operations. So we're working very closely, and we're also modelling some different scenarios. Conscious of time, I'm just going to give you a very quick-fire update on some customer-focused improvements in Greater Manchester. We're going to launch a new mobility scooter permit scheme at the end of this month. So we're taking advantage of the fact that our new trains are now fully accessible. You'll hear much more detail about that soon, but they're on routes from Barrow, Windermere to Manchester Airport, Blackpool to Manchester Airport through the Bolton Corridor, and also Liverpool to Manchester Airport through the Cheshire line. So that's a great news for accessibility. We're putting 42 additional people into our train presentation team. They're being recruited. They're starting in early April. You'll see much more visibility of cleaners, turnaround cleaners at locations like Warrington, Preston, Blackpool, Blackburn, Southport, Victoria, Piccadilly, and also Manchester Airport. So I think you'll see a step change in on-train cleanliness. Moorside Station, which you'll be aware was subject to an arson attack. The works on Moorside should be completed today, thanks to a lot of good work by Network Rail, and that will open to passenger services again on Monday. Levenshulme, we had a joint site visit to Levenshulme with the Mayor a couple of weeks ago, and some good work with Network Rail means that we'll be on site in May, making sure that the drainage is sorted, the subway is relined, decorated, new lighting, make it a much more presentable station. I know that's something that's been mentioned here before, so I wanted to give you that update. Kersley, significant amounts of antisocial behaviour at Kersley. We have seen a drop following some good joint work between the Greater Manchester Police and the British Transport Police. We hope that that continues. And also innovation in smart ticketing. So this is a TfN funded scheme. As we gradually move towards account-based ticketing on heavy rail, you will see developments in that soon, like a carnet type ticket, like a flexible season ticket that people will be able to tap in and tap out. So essentially they get better value. So no longer will it be, you know, the option of buying a 7-day weekly ticket where you use it for 5 days and don't use it for 2. You'll be able to buy 10 tickets in bulk. And you'll hear a lot more about that shortly. And in addition, probably the final one to mention is improved Sunday service performance following that groundbreaking deal that we struck a number of weeks ago. Our Sunday service performance has really bounced back. It's really encouraging to see. And we've still got discounts, additional discounts on Sundays that people can take advantage of, much cheaper tickets, as part of that whole rebuilding trust. And I will say one final thing. We've actually changed the way that we measure performance in this new franchise, in this new world. So for us, similar to Avanti West Coast, we're no longer measuring PPM. We're no longer measuring cancellation and significant lateness. We're using much more customer-focused measures, which I hope you'll welcome. So you'll see those in the next reporting packs. We're using time to 3 minutes, time to 15 minutes, and cancellations. So you'll see those specific measures, much more customer-focused, I think, and more stringent than the PPM measure that, of course, was between 0 and 5 minutes at destination. Hopefully that's given you a very quick canter through. There was more I wanted to cover, but if there's anything specific you'd like to raise with me, I'll be staying back at the end.
Thank you, Chair. Many of the themes are the same as Chris's. I think, as can be seen in the report, we need to say TPE recognises and apologises for the unacceptable performance that was seen in periods 9 and 10 around the Christmas period. As the report shows, there was a strong recovery in period 11, and we subsequently reinstated all services that were withdrawn as part of the emergency timetable in January during February. Weather and network issues, as well as some technical issues with both new and old trains, saw a bit of a setback in February, but I'm very pleased to report that in the current month, over the first 2 weeks, we've seen a recovery into the 80s, and our confidence in reliability of the network when there are no major disruptive events has increased significantly. For example, we're delivering at 96% punctuality as we sit here today, and very pleased colleagues in Northern are also seeing a similar day to that in Manchester. That is supported by changes that are referenced in the report in relation to the December timetable. I think in the Northern section there's some mention of some changes in East Manchester, and I think the industry worked really well on bringing some core punctuality changes to that December timetable, and we're starting to see that now. At Transpennine, we'd like to recognise the efforts of all colleagues in the industry during the very challenging storm period with Chiara and Dennis. I've worked in the industry in the region for 20 years, and I don't think, particularly on the worst Sunday in the middle of February, I'd seen so many lines closed when we were working together in the ROC. So well done to colleagues in Network Rail, Northern and many other agencies who were battling away against the elements on that occasion. Given the unacceptable level of TOC on self-delivery during the winter period, there's been some business changes at Transpennine and some reviews of how we work, both within the business and with our suppliers, and we're currently developing a recovery plan for our client, Rail North Partnership. That will be presented by the end of March, and I think the Mayor referenced that in his discussion. That will include some forecasts for our performance both in the mid-year and towards the end of the year on an improvement trajectory. We see that as being highly complementary to the work that's going on within Northern and the wider industry in relation to the 100-day plan, and we'll be having dialogue with that recovery task force and the team at Northern around those. But as the Mayor said, there are some material improvements that are out there on the network. We need to be clear, there are 75% more carriages in the Transpennine fleet than there were in May of last year. That's delivering manifest capacity improvements, more than 60% additional capacity out on the network. 36 of the 44 new trains have now been delivered, and more than 90% of staff trained. So as Chris mentioned for Northern, at Transpennine, the worst period of this challenge around training of staff, 250 drivers now trained with more than 5,000 training days. That's now passed. We complete that during March on 2 of the 3 fleets, and we look forward to seeing some improvements. Some mention of challenges around reliability of new trains. It's still not acceptable, but there are some green shoots of recovery. We've seen a trebling of reliability between January and March, and we're working very hard to see further improvements. But we do recognise, particularly on our routes on the West Coast Main Line, so from Manchester up to Preston and into Scotland, we've still got lots of work to do. There's some further specific improvements that are due, particularly on our route through Tameside. We've put in a lot of capacity in December. We went from 1 strengthened train serving Mosley and Greenfield prior to December to 3 trains in the peak on a half-hourly consistent service strengthened in December. That moves to 4 with a critical peak train added to that in May. So we'll see those improvements coming through. And just to build on some of the Mayor's comments around Castlefield Corridor, Transpennine would be delighted to talk to any member who wants to talk about the industry's position. I think the industry is still quite clear. The investment is at the Department for Transport. All parts of the industry in Greater Manchester want to see infrastructure development, and it has been picked up, and I think the committee's wealth of knowledge on the subject is important to note. It isn't just about the Castlefield Corridor itself. There are other pinch points on the network. We've heard Stockport mentioned, but there are a number of other pinch points that I think as an industry we want to see addressed, and I'm sure we can provide some technical support to any member who wants to understand that. And that's probably all I'll say, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, moving to members' questions. I've got Matt first.
Oh, do you mean to up here?
Yeah, you go do.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just for Network Rail and the TOCs in relation to points 6.1 and 6.2 on the agenda, just about this project that's being carried out to sort of harmonise the workforce on platforms 13 and 14. I mean, it's nice that they've got high-vis tabards and they're receiving joint training, but what work is being done to actually retain them staff? Because as I understand, the Network Rail staff on the platform are on permanent contracts, whilst the TOC staff on platform 13 and 14 work for outsourced security companies and they're on 0-hour contracts a lot of the time. So I'd like to know, have you changed any of the terms and conditions? Because I do feel that this training will be quite futile if you've got them still in precarious work. All it's going to do is make it a little bit harder for me, and I'll have to ask them now which company they work for and how long they've been here. Because it's all about retaining the knowledge and having a sense of public service ethos on platform 13 and 14. That's gone in Piccadilly as far as I'm concerned, because it's been ran to the bottom. A lot of people have moved, and this sort of precarious workforce are just constantly there at Piccadilly. So I'd be interested to know, because, you know, we have a lot of people who are vulnerable passengers, elderly, who need to know where they're going and what they're doing. I know all the signage is being improved, but how are we going to retain these staff when they're trained? Because I do feel that this exercise will be a little bit futile, although I welcome the Universal Tabard programme. Thank you very much, Chair.
I'll take that one. Thanks for the question. I think in terms of the piece of work, talking about the good things that it's going to bring, I think that sense of working together that you've talked about, and that sense of being there for vulnerable people is going to be a real boon. And I think we should celebrate that. And I think there's been some really close working between the operators and Network Rail and TFGM as well. So I think your question about retaining staff is really, really important. Piccadilly, as we said, there's staff that come through there, and we want to make it so that it's a good place to work, it's a great place to work, and actually something that they can take that pride in. And I think part of the training is actually saying, well, platform 13 and 14, we know it's a challenge, but how do we get them into working in the correct manner? So it is a real challenge, and that's something that's been built into the training, is how do we do that? From a Network Rail perspective, in our staff, we do have, I think, a lot of them is generally permanent contracts, and I think our turnover has improved fairly dramatically from where we were maybe 4 or 5 years ago in terms of keeping hold of those staff. So it's a challenge, and it's something that we are working on. trying to drive that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, so I suppose it's a question then for the TOCs. Have you looked at the terms and conditions of the staff that work at Piccadilly as a way of retaining staff?
So I think it's some of the turnover issues that are present, I think, is potentially a bit of a success story for a number of staff. So if we've seen some transition, many of those are promoted through to further promotions within the team. We have seen a lot of people enter the industry working on the platform and moving through to carrying out roles, for example, on board trains as members of train crew, or even in our control centres. We do keep the terms and conditions under review. One of the longer term and more strategic points of the working group, so I think what's referenced in the paper is a start. There are some further discussions and work ongoing about how we can move to a more integrated team. Clearly, we've all mentioned some reviews going on within particularly the TOCs in relation to how we operate, and I think we'll take the members' feedback and understand how that fits for effectively a broader one-team ethic at Piccadilly going forward.
Okay, Warren.
Thanks, Chair. You've mentioned then something about increased services through Tameside. I take it you meant through Ashton Station. I just wondered if there was any more details that you could forward on to me about that. I don't need an answer now.
Okay, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. It's a little bit of irony in this comment. I'm delighted that our local rail service providers, Northern and Transpennine, have actually got trains that are accessible. It's just a pity we don't have the stations at rest.
Thanks, Chair. Chris, it's great that you've come here today with a good news story for people around the table, apart from ourselves in Rochdale. It seems like we're second best. We're getting the clamped out pacer trains to get people on because you've got no new trains. What commitment can you give the people of Rochdale on the length of time they've got to use these trains? By the time the trains reach Smithy Bridge, they're full in the morning. People at Castleton, Rochdale Town Centre, Rochdale train station and Mills Hill can't get on the train, so to provide us with one pacer train is highly unacceptable. And can I also ask you, have you started a dialogue yet with Danny Vaughan from Metrolink in relation to the Cross Town Centre ticket, which we spoke about some months ago?
Okay, thanks for your questions. In terms of Rochdale, absolutely not second best. We've got 101 brand new trains. Rochdale are benefiting from them now. They will benefit from more of them in May as more of the diesel services are introduced over the Calder Valley line, and of course the Pacers go into retirement. As I mentioned, it was a difficult decision to continue the use of Pacers, but I believe it was the right one to provide the capacity whilst we've got so many units out on refurb, to make them accessible and to make them digital, which is what our customers want. I think it's also important to reflect as well about the improvements that Rochdale has seen over the last few years. So now, 6 trains per hour, that's in the past it was lucky it was 3. There's been a significant uplift from a Rochdale perspective. But to give you some comfort, more new trains will be introduced through the Calder Valley, and that's to and from Rochdale. Also refurbished trains from the May timetable. So you will see that. To answer your other question in relation to tickets, I know we've had some dialogue regarding the success of the ticket between Rochdale Railway Station and Rochdale Town Centre. I understand that has been a success. It's currently temporary, and I believe that's something that we'd like to explore further to see whether or not we could make that permanent. So I'll be engaging with Danny, and thank you for the prompt on that.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'll take Angie and then I'll move on.
I'll try and make this quick. I'm going to be nice to you, and there were 2 bits. I was very pleased to hear about the way you're reporting the performance now. One thing you didn't mention that I was really pleased to see was included in it was the number of trains that miss out stations, the skip stopping, because that's been a particular bugbear on the Hope Valley line. And I'm hoping it's going to reflect the passengers' real experience of using the service, so I think it is a really good thing. Also, I noticed up the Hope Valley line that platforms are being extended, particularly at Hathersage. I'm not sure if it's finished. Does that mean we will now actually get real four-carriage trains coming down the line from Sheffield? And then I've also been asked to ask about your depots, because you had your brand new one that you've opened at Ince, but I believe you've lost some slots at Slade Lane. And I just wondered if this is impacting your performance at all, if you want to just unpack a bit on that.
Thank you, Angie. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the performance measures, to take that first, I think they're much more reflective of the customer experience. So I really, really welcome those, and hopefully you'll enjoy reading those in reports in future. In terms of the platform extensions on the Hope Valley, that's part of a programme of works. I don't have the specifics about what trains will be strengthened on that line, but what I can tell you is from May, Rosehill, the Hope Valley, they will see brand new trains operating on that route, on the stopping services. So you will see those new trains. I can get you some specific examples about what will be strengthened following the meeting. In terms of depots, yes, you're right, £46 million, which Mark came in and helped to open at Wigan, Springs Branch. Fantastic depot for us. Longsight we use less of now. A lot of our units go on to Ardwick, which is the state-of-the-art depot, just round the corner. So we only stable a couple of units at Longsight, but Ardwick is really state-of-the-art. It's got everything it needs to service the units ready for their service the next morning. So in that sense, there is sufficient capacity. What the North has to toil with as a more bigger issue is the fact that there is very little stabling capacity outside of the hubs, and that's something we're toying with, and I know we'll be working with Network Rail and others to try and address.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, changes to the bus network. Alison and Nick.
Good afternoon, everyone. Familiar report. Moving on to Annex A, seems to be a popular month for a lot of commercial changes. So Annex A is quite a busy section. Before I open it up to questions, probably just worth highlighting, we've mentioned previously about the retirement of Jim Stones, the Lee operator, and the concern about covering those services. So I'm pleased to see that we've managed to work locally with operators to cover that at no extra cost. Chair, I don't know whether you want to mention anything there relating to those.
I do. Just a special thank to officers, really. We've had numerous meetings, and thank you very much for listening to our concerns and taking it to operators. And thanks to the operators that are covering those routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So open it up for Annex A questions, please. Any questions for operators around commercial changes in Annex A?
Anybody? Yep, John.
It was actually just more a comment and a general question to Stagecoach. The comment is that it's very nice to see quite a few additional services in South Manchester, some of which affect my own council ward, but there seems to be a real discrepancy between southern services that appear to be improving and other services around Greater Manchester that seem to be getting worse in terms of services being withdrawn. Obviously, that's something that we would hope that would be addressed if we end up with a different model of running our bus services in the future. But my specific question relating to the additional services in South Manchester affecting Chorlton and Didsbury was really about all the services seem to be going in one direction, and I just wondered, was that because those services are particularly necessary at that time, or is that about getting buses into South Manchester to then run more peak time services into the city centre?
Thank you, Chair. The journeys have been added basically each year. We regularly review the demand of all journeys at the start and the end of the day and throughout the day. Where we've highlighted significant numbers of people travelling on the first and last journeys, we then look to expand the timetable to just see what generation we can get in terms of patronage. There are some journeys that are being removed. Those are funding some of these additional journeys, but overall, we are adding additional journeys in 2 services.
Yeah, just specifically, if I take one of the services, and actually I should also have said it's great to see an extra service on the 85 from town back into Chorlton later at night. But I find it difficult to believe that there is a massive increase in the number of people wanting to get a bus from town to South Manchester at 6:20 in the morning. I could have sort of more understood there being a bigger demand for an additional service going into the city centre. So it was just whether or not it was really about getting that bus into South Manchester to then get commuters back into town for work.
Yeah, okay, thank you. No, it's, you know, we do have depots across South Manchester. So, for example, if we look at the 101, they're operating journeys from Manchester to Wythenshawe. The depot is actually based at Sharston, so it is Wythenshawe ended. It's basically, as I said, you know, we've looked at the journeys. The first journey coming out of town on the 101 is busy, so, you know, let's try it, see if we can generate additional demand. It may not work, but, you know, if there are significant people using the first journey, then you'd like to think that, you know, there is the demand for an earlier bus.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got any other questions on Annex A? David?
Thank you, Chair. I hope it's okay for me to raise this at this point. It was just it's in relation to a service that is operated within Stockport, and it's a stagecoach service. It's just to do with the 192. I know TFGM officers approached Stagecoach in relation to potentially diverting the 192 back from Hazel Grove into Stepping Hill Hospital. I was told that basically the reason being that why you wouldn't necessarily do it was because it would inconvenience too many passengers. I'm going to ask really that you look at this again, because we've got real issues in Stepping Hill in terms of parking. It's a really quite a big live issue in terms of a lot of parking on residential streets and so on. I think by doing this diversion, it could potentially take pressure off those surrounding streets, just from the Hazel Grove end. So then obviously those then who may not, you know, usually use the car can at least just jump on the 192 to access Stepping Hill services at the hospital. So I'm going to ask you really if you can look at this again, if that's all, if that's all, at all possible. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, you know, we're happy to look at it again. We have looked at it previously. We did also operate 373 previously that ran from Hazel Grove into Stepping Hill, but, you know, there was very low demand for that service. There is also the issue within Stepping Hill, the area provided for buses to turn round. So that's another consideration that, you know, there may not actually be sufficient capacity for extra 192s to go in there. But, we're happy to look at it and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions? Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just in relation to the withdrawal of the early morning service on the X30. If people, members of the committee didn't know, the X30 is the express bus that goes from Stockport bus station to the airport. I was actually at the airport for a briefing on Wednesday, and I was speaking to Andy Saunders, who's the chief manager of, I don't know who is actually representing Stagecoach here, so no, hello, sir. Yeah, okay, sorry. I was speaking to one of the chief managers about why there's no branding for the airport buses. I mean, the 330 that used to go from Ashton all the way to the airport was branded as an airport bus. And Mr Saunders at the airport said that Stagecoach and TFGM wouldn't allow branding on the X30 service. You know, we're talking about low patronage here. That is one of the reasons behind the bus being withdrawn. So I feel that the X30 needs to be labelled the same way as the 330 was. I know it's a new service, but so it is. Yeah, it is related to Annex A. But I would like, if possible, to have a meeting between me, you, and between the council and the airport on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just on the X30, we did have some other plans that we were working through. I can confirm that journey is no longer being withdrawn. Since this was published, we've reinstated that journey. And with regards to the branding of the vehicles, from experience operating the 330 going through Stockport and onto the airport, significant delays on the motorway network, which is one of the reasons that we curtailed the 330 and introduced the X30. But the issue is if we brand the vehicles and they do get delayed, we then have to introduce additional vehicles into the service. When those X30s then arrive back in Stockport, they'll be branded as an X30 but operating on other routes within Stockport. So that's one of the reasons that, you know, we haven't branded them. It is something we can look at and discuss with TFGM, but the comment regarding TFGM and Stagecoach, it's not anything to do really in some ways with TFGM about us branding vehicles. That would be a decision that we will take commercially.
Just on that one, you have to weigh it up though. You know, they're not very well used, the X30, because people don't actually know it's an express bus service. And I know it just hits the motorway straight away, and not a hell of a lot of people will see it between there and the airport. But there's hardly any people on it. There's a few airport employees and those who know about it. So you're going to have to have a look at it again, I think, and weigh it up.
If you could take that after the meeting, that would be brilliant. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. It's for Stagecoach. Can you explain to me the benefit of taking one bus off at 6:30 when the next one after, the 346 service, is 25 minutes later or 10 minutes earlier?
Yeah, sorry, thank you for that. Right, yeah, it's just due to passenger demand. Where we've identified that, there are a significant number of passengers travelling on those journeys, it's just trying to, increase the patronage on the other journeys around it and make the, the service viable and sustainable in the, as we go forward. 346, we are fortunate, the service is doing quite well. We are looking at where we can provide additional journeys as well, but at the same time we do need to just do a bit of housekeeping on those services where passengers aren't using particular journeys.
Okay, thank you. Annex C.
Okay, nothing to report on Annex B, and as we've said, we've got emergency meeting planned for the 31st. In terms of Annex C, the only thing I'd like to report, Chair, is that further to the meeting I think we had in January and at the request of Councillor Leach, we did go back and speak to councillors in Shaw relating to the 403. Well received the meeting, and we spoke to councillors to look at rerouting the service to demand, and that was well received. So with their support and local customer feedback, we did that, and we're reporting that back, that change at this meeting. So quite happy to take any further comments, questions relating to Annex C.
Okay, any questions on Annex C? John?
Just to say thank you for the work that was done on that.
No problem, thank you very much. So we'll move on. Item 10, Transport Revenue and Capital Budget. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The suite of reports that are attached to item 10 include the transport revenue and capital budgets for next year. They include a lot of detail, but in summary, a cash flat revenue funding settlement for our core activities. And then within the second report, there is detail of some of the activities that are funded from the Mayor's general budget and the Mayor's precept. The third report, which is the capital report, includes the latest position as at the time of writing in terms of how this year is going to outturn, and then the budget for next year. You'll see also from the cover sheet that the report also requests approval and agreement from members in relation to a small number of fares and charges. And then last but not least, to note that the budget includes a grant of up to 4.6 million, which is the same number as this year, for GMATL, who operate the Ring and Ride service. There's a lot of detail, Chair. Very happy to take questions now or outside the meeting.
Yeah, anybody? John?
Just a very brief question, Chair. In relation to the general reserves for TFGM and GMCA, it says the proposed 6.5 million is assessed as appropriate. Just out of interest, what would be an inappropriate level of reserves?
It's a very good question, and one that changes based on the risk profile. I think it's probably worth, but without giving you a precise answer, I think it's worth just reflecting that the reserves that are held are various. So there is the general reserve, and there are also a number of reserves that are held to manage certain specific risks. I think our judgment is that that number has remained very steady for a number of years. The risks that we faced are different, but probably of a similar scale year on year. I think anything much below that number in the context of our spend would be inappropriate, hence the reason why there's been no drawdowns from that general reserve, certainly in the time that I can remember that I've been here, which is a long time.
Yeah, because the reduction from the start of this current financial year to the proposed outturn at the end of the next financial year is a reduction, just doing a very quick calculation, of somewhere between 30 and 40%. That's quite a big drop. So you are confident that so effectively the reserves that we had before, the general reserves, were more than we actually required.
Yeah, I think you're referring, Councillor Lee, is it the table on page 83 as hand numbered that you're referring to? Yeah, so the significant majority of the reduction in the reserves are in the specific reserves. So around the capital programme reserve, which is predominantly used to pay off the debts that we've incurred in relation to the Metrolink and the wider transport infrastructure programme. If you look from March 20 into March 21, there is no proposed drawdowns from either the TFGM reserve or the specific reserve in making those recommendations in terms of drawdown from reserves, in particular capital programme, integrated ticketing and others. We make an assessment of the risks that remain and a balanced view as to whether it's appropriate to do that, and that is something that we need leaders' approval to do. So we come under scrutiny for that, both both from leaders and also both internally. So the 5.454 million general reserve that we hold as TFGM is something that we look at, and I'd certainly consider that to be appropriate, albeit appropriate in the context of the other reserves that we hold specifically to manage those specific individual risks that are in the top half of the table.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Bri?
Others will know exactly where this is, but I heard at our authority about putting quite a lot of money in, ours was the smallest because we're the smallest borough, into the Mayor's franchising plan. He's hoping he gets the money from the government, but in the meantime, each authority is giving the money to support it. Could you point me to the page where it gives the list of the figures? I'm sure it's there somewhere.
It isn't from memory, Councillor, in this report. There was a separate report that went to the combined authority.
Did it come here?
Did it come here?
Because when it came to our audit,
that's a very good question.
I didn't know anything about it.
So within the assessment in relation to bus reform, there was in the original assessment there was a list of what was described as credible funding sources. Within the proposal that went out to consultation, there was a defined list, a shortened list from the overall total of credible funding sources. That was specifically included in a report to the Combined Authority before we commenced the consultation. I want to say it was the 7th of October, but I've slept since then. It's certainly around about that time. Would it help if I forward you a copy of that report?
The list, just the list, not the
Yeah,
whole report.
it includes each of the funding sources, and to the extent some of it is local authority specific. Yeah. There's a breakdown, pretty sure it's in that report, of how they're shared, of how that's divvied up.
In our authority, I chaired the report on given to councillors on franchising, not realising we put quite a bit of money into this. I don't think it was made very clear to ordinary councillors. Okay. I don't know, perhaps other authorities.
I think the reality in summary, and I'll absolutely will forward you the report.
Please,
it's probably easier to do that, and then to the extent you've got any specific questions, more than happy to give you a call and talk you through it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on now to item 12, Transport Capital Programme Update. Bob?
Thanks, Chair. Very quickly, this is a report just giving you an update on the various infrastructure programmes that have been undertaken in GM related to transport. As the Mayor mentioned earlier on, we've got Trafford Park Line opening early on the 22nd of March. 12-minute service will operate initially to Cornbrook and then move on to Crumpsall later in the year. That'll bring the total number of stops on the Metrolink network to 99. Everybody's going to be vying for who's number 100. Next major infrastructure package to be delivered will be Ashton-under-Lyme interchange. That's due to open in summer. And it's worth noting the amount of work that's continuing on the Cycling and Walking Challenge Fund, where we've got 82 schemes that have now received programme entry. This, together with Cycle City Ambition Grant Programme, will see a step change in our cycling and walking provision. I'll leave it at that for the moment, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, has anybody got any questions? No? Thank you very much. Item 13, exclusion to the press and public. Can we move that, please? Thank you. Thank you very much for all the operators for your attendance today. Appreciate it. Thank you.